Hello, friends. Steve Stockton here with you. Welcome to Listener Stories, a chilling series where we delve into the depths of the unknown through spine-tingling tales submitted by you, our listeners. From eerie encounters with the supernatural to inexplicable phenomena that defy all logic. Join us as we navigate the shadows of the human experience and explore the darkest corners of the imagination. Each episode promises to leave you on the edge of your seat, questioning what lurks in the darkness and what secrets lie hidden in the night. So dim the lights, settle in, and prepare yourself for a journey into the realm of the unexplained. A skinwalker encounter. I just recently found you on YouTube and have been binging on your content. I thought I would share my story with you. First thing you need to understand about me is how I was raised. I was raised in the upper Midwest, but by people from the deepest parts of Appalachia. I was also raised in close contact with two separate native tribes and in a religious household. I grew up knowing demons existed. I grew up knowing witchcraft existed. I grew up knowing all the folklore of the tribes in the hills was true, but it was always something that affected other people in distant lands or even distant eras. Most of my encounters with anything paranormal or out of the ordinary have been completely benign encounters that I've half convinced myself weren't really real. Like my first encounter with one of the fae folk in the form of a winged fairy flying by my head. I can almost believe it was just some fall leaves in the wind and I didn't really see it. Or my conversations with two loved ones who had passed were just a dream of me longing to talk to them. Nothing that I couldn't dismiss, nothing that scared me, until 5 years ago. I was working a second shift factory job in the dead of winter. This particular night, a horrible snowstorm was blowing through, and I had to drive 25 miles on very rural roads to get home from work. The going was slow. The snowplows and salt trucks decided to quit early and hadn't gotten to my route at all. I was playing the wonderful game of, am I on the road or not? As I barely rolled down the road in my vehicle, I kept watch for vehicles in the ditch, high drifts that may cause problems, and the like. I saw very little traffic and nothing of wildlife. Approximately 5 miles from home, I saw a person in the road. I took my foot off the gas to slow even more because touching the brakes was not an option on these roads. I scanned the ditches quickly to look for a vehicle that had gone off the road as I neared this figure ahead of me. Didn't see a vehicle. Now, I could see the person continuing to walk in front of my vehicle to the other side of the road. When they neared the ditch, they stuck their arms in front of them as if they fell forward. As the outstretched arms touched the ground, the person began to transform into a white and gray wolf. It was huge, and I could clearly see the transformation taking place. For the briefest of moments, the figure had the front end of a wolf and the back end of a human. It then went over the shoulder down into the ditch, and I could no longer see it. I wanted to punch the gas, but I knew I would end up wrecking. I slowly increased my speed to continue home. It took me 20 minutes to make the last 5 miles. The roads were that bad. I felt that there was no way I could outrun it in my vehicle, and if I tried, I would be at a standstill in the ditch. And I knew I needed to make it home because I knew it was following me. Not only did I feel watched or stalked, I felt hunted. I prayed and cried all the way. When I got home, I ran straight into my cousin's house next door to mine, shut the door and locked it, and leaned against it crying. He came running to see what was wrong. Because he grew up the same way I did, I didn't have to explain much beyond the words, I just saw a skinwalker, and it's followed me home. After some quickly spoken expletives, he asked me what it was. I told him a wolf. He sat up with me for the rest of the night. I was too terrified to go to sleep. It's been 5 years, and it still scares me. Though I now live in a different house, I'm still in the same area, and I'm terrified of seeing it again. I'm not on drugs. I do drink, but not when I'm driving. My mental health is sound. And I'm not a young kid with a wild imagination. I'm a pretty solid woman in my 50s. Yes, demons are real, but angels are too. And I know it's not a faraway time or place anymore. It's here and now. Stay safe, everyone. Thanks for listening, and thank you for your content. Signed, Anonymous. A loud encounter. My ex-husband and I were arguing furiously one night in the early 2000s. Thankfully, our daughter was spending the night with her grandparents and was not a witness. We were both very intoxicated, and I'm certain this added fuel to the fire of our fight. This awful argument was unlike us both. We weren't normally prone to such heated, disgusting vitriol, but here we were, screaming until our throats were sore. I left the living room and ran into our bedroom and slammed the door shut. I sat on the bed and flipped on the television to drown out my thoughts. Moments later, I heard a horrible, loud noise coming from the living room. It sounded as if our large-screen TV had been slammed to the hardwood floor. I was absolutely furious. I was sure, in a rage, my ex had pulled the television off the wall, thrown it to the floor, and shattered it just to spite me. I charged out of the room and screamed, "Stop tearing up my house!" He looked at me blankly and said, "I have no idea what you're talking about." I yelled again, saying, "I heard that loud noise. What in the hell are you destroying in here?" He retorted with, "Look, I have no clue what you're talking about, but I've just been sitting here. I've done nothing." Not seeing any damage, I just walked back in the bedroom and shut the door. Moments later, he comes barging in the room with, "What are you breaking? What was that loud noise?" I, confused, said, "I didn't hear a thing. I didn't do anything. I don't know what you're talking about." We both sat on the bed, dumbfounded, relaying our non-shared experience of loud, unmistakable, booming, crashing sounds. We walked into the living room to continue our quandary, and then simultaneously heard a sharp rapping come from the floor below our feet. It was as if someone had taken a broom handle to the ceiling to alert noisy neighbors. However, this was not a shared tenant's ceiling. We lived in a single-story home. The noise was emanating from our basement. We both got very quiet, now frightened that someone was in our home. I followed my ex into the kitchen, where we again heard another succession of raps under our feet. Together, we descended the stairs to the basement to gingerly look around for the culprit. After searching every nook, we decided this too must be a paranormal happening, above and beyond the crashing sounds we heard separately. It is my personal belief that our loved ones, who had passed before us to the great beyond, were trying to break up our awful fight. Whomever was responsible certainly shut us up, and with confusion and fright, we aligned ourselves on the same team. We immediately stopped fighting, and I said to my ex, "They don't want us arguing. We need to work this out." I've had additional otherworldly happenings, but this one sticks with me, reminding me that love should rule your head, not selfish anger. Keep up the excellent work. Thank you for all that you do. Signed, Leslie in Ohio. Shadow Person Encounter. Hi, Steve. I've been listening to you for a couple of months, and I just followed you on Facebook. I only have one story of what I think was a paranormal experience. I was 7 years old. I went to bed one night, and my parents were downstairs. It was just the three of us in the house. My bedroom door was open, and I was facing the doorway. I had to have the hall light on to sleep. I had a hard time sleeping as a kid, and I know I was nowhere near drifting off when this happened. I tossed and turned, and one of the times I turned back over to face the doorway. On the illuminated but blank hallway wall, I saw something. I began to faintly see the shadow outline on the wall that was growing slightly darker and larger and bouncing a bit, as if it were walking up the stairs that were just around the corner from my bedroom door. I heard nothing, but assumed it must be my dad. But I clearly heard my parents talking and watching TV downstairs. The shadow was clearly outlined. It was like a silhouette of a man who appeared to be wearing a long coat, hat, and carrying a briefcase. There appeared to be a cigarette or a cigar sticking out of his mouth in the shadow. The shadow remained completely still, but I distinctly remember watching the faintest shadow of smoke curl and twist upwards from what he was smoking. I think that part freaked me out more than anything. I was in disbelief and squeezed my eyes shut and hid my little head under the blanket. When I opened them, it was gone. I don't remember if I told my parents that night or the next morning, but nothing ever came of it. I just know I wasn't asleep. Signed, Anonymous. My story, originally posted on Reddit. I had a very strange experience 12 years ago in Starved Rock State Park, Illinois. It was so bizarre at the time, I never discussed it. I began reading the missing 411 stories a few weeks ago and realized what I encountered fits into the profile. Additionally, since many of the 411 stories border on the unexplainable and bizarre, I feel what I encountered was not unique, that it was part of an actual phenomenon. Here's my story. I was visiting my girlfriend in Chicago. On a sunny and calm winter day, we decided to go for a hike at Starved Rock State Park, Illinois. I'm an avid hiker, and being on leave from Iraq, I wanted to take in some cool, fresh air. We hiked the park for several hours. In late afternoon, we started heading back to the car. About a half mile away from the parking lot, we came into an area where tree branches were broken and pulled towards or over the trail. Most of the branches were broken high up, I'd say 8 feet and more off the ground. I'd lived in Washington before going to Iraq and knew something of Sasquatch areas. So I told the girlfriend it looked like a squatch area due to the branches broken off up high and pulled over the trail. That's about the time things started to get strange. Soon after mentioning this, I felt like someone was staring at me. It's like if you go in a room with a lot of people and someone is focused on you, you get an uneasy feeling and can tell you're being watched. It was like this, but stronger. I started to look around to see who was watching me. It was winter, and the forest was visible hundreds of feet in all directions. There was a group of walkers several hundred feet behind us, and no one in front of us, but I saw no one staring at me. As we passed through the squatch area, I began to have the feeling someone was behind me, following us. I looked around and listened, but saw and heard nothing. There was just the people 400 feet or so back on the trail, and they were talking amongst themselves. They weren't looking our way. The sense of someone being behind me was persistent, so I kept looking behind me, I'd say at least twice a minute. But there was just the group way back. The feeling of being watched is one thing, but feeling like someone is close behind you is something else. It's more disturbing. I told the girlfriend to go further in front of me and let her go about 20 feet in front because I had a strong sensation of a nearby presence just behind us. So I turned around not more than 30 seconds since the last time. I looked back, and there's this woman there. She was walking, but coming up on me fast. There was something way off about her speed. She was walking when I spotted her, but her speed was much faster than her gait. It was as if she was on a people mover escalator, like in an airport. She was coming up fast, and I'd say no more than 15 or 20 feet behind me when I saw her. I was rather alarmed and glared at her. She stopped when our eyes met. I gave her a look like, "WTF are you doing coming up on me like that?" We stood there staring at each other. Neither of us moved. She had her head cocked back to her left and looked at me from the corner of her eyes in a slightly alarmed, "you caught me" type of look. She was completely normal looking, like a local Chicago lady, late 50s, wearing a bright red winter coat, gloves, slacks, etc. In hindsight, there are a few other things besides her speed which stand out. The first thing is there was no sound, no footsteps, no rustling in the woods, nothing to tell me to turn around other than the strong sense of something behind me, which I'd had for a bit. At the speed she was moving, she would have had to have been running hard, but I heard no footsteps. She was not breathing hard, and her mouth was closed. Her gait was a walking gait. She was not running. However, she was moving towards me at a running speed. I mean fast. When she stopped, I'd say she was less than 20 feet from me. At the speed she was moving, in 1 or 2 seconds, she'd have been on me. The next thing that stands out is her features. She had no distinguishing features, none in her hair, skin, or clothing. No shadowing or skin hues, dimples, etc. As a former Army criminal investigator, I know to look for distinctive markings on people and clothing. There were none. I'd estimate her height at 5 feet 10 inches. Her clothes were of uniform coloring and indistinct. It was like she just stepped out of a department store. Her bright red coat was pristine with a uniform hue to it. There wasn't even shading, which there should have been given the clear sky and low sun. After staring at each other for, I'd say, 5 to 10 seconds, I felt like I got my point across, so I turned around and continued walking. The girlfriend had not noticed anything and had continued walking. I took about 3 steps and realized there was no way she could have come up from that group in the 30 or so seconds since I'd last looked back. There was also nowhere to come from on either side. The visibility at that point was hundreds of feet all around. I said to myself, no way, and spun back around. She was gone, simply vanished. I checked the group behind us, and no one had a red coat on or was looking at us. There was no one else around, and there had been no sounds other than my footfalls. The woman just vanished. From that point, it took us about 10 minutes to reach the car. For the remainder of the walk, I did not feel like I was being stared at or followed. I've never been back to Starved Rock State Park and have no intentions of going back. The whole thing was bizarre. How was I supposed to tell anyone about that? So I never have. My mental state was fine. I have a high IQ and a 20-year career in a STEM field following Army service. At the time, I was working a DoD IT contract in Iraq. I was well rested and relaxed, being on vacation with a girlfriend. There were no drugs or alcohol involved. These are strictly prohibited in my line of work and were grounds for immediate termination under MNFI's GO1, which I was subject to at the time. I've carried this experience around for 12 plus years, being unable to talk about it because it was so exceptional and unexplainable. It's a relief to read similar stories of unusual encounters and disappearances. After reading many missing 411 accounts and the profile of disappearances, I believe I narrowly averted being snatched by whatever that thing was. I do not think it was the woman that I saw. I think it was something different, which I could not see. Signed, Anonymous. Possible Dogman Encounter. I watched your video, Strange and Unexplained Encounters in the Woods, and it was John's story about the Dogman in Franklin County, Indiana, that really grabbed my attention. I've listened to it about 3 times now. I believe John's story about what he saw in the woods that day. I used to live in a small town located just outside of Oxford, Ohio. Right outside of Oxford is Houston Woods State Park, which is little more than 30 minutes from Franklin County, Indiana. One summer's day back in 2003, my boyfriend, a couple friends, and I decided to go camping in Houston Woods that weekend. It was a great weekend for camping. I remember the weather was almost perfect, not too hot or humid. Just like we always did, we set up our tents, built a fire, listened to music, and just hung out before calling it a night. First night that we were there, I remember waking up and opening my eyes after hearing a sound. I couldn't make out what it was because I was mostly asleep when I heard it. I just remember it was loud enough that it woke me up. I thought that I was either dreaming or that it was one of the other campers fooling around outside. I looked at my cell phone and it was a little past 3 in the morning. Put my phone away and closed my eyes to fall back asleep. A few minutes passed and my eyes sprang open when I heard it again. What sounded like howling coming from the woods. It was so much clearer since I was fully conscious. I sat straight up this time and shook my boyfriend awake. I couldn't believe that he didn't hear it. The howling coming from the woods was loud enough to wake up the other campers in the campground as well, including our friend who called for me from the tent that was connected to ours. She asked me what it was. Told her that I didn't know as I was looking up, straining to hear it again. The campground was dead quiet at this point, with only a few fires still glowing outside that I could see from inside our tent. I knew there were other people listening for it too. I can't recall hearing anything but the sound of popping and crackling from the campfires. Where did all the crickets go? Then it happened again. Another howl coming from the woods just beyond the campground. I've never heard anything like it. The best way I can describe it is that it sounded like a monster or some kind of mutant creature either pissed off or in pain. It was so unnatural. It sounded a lot like the werewolf in the scene from An American Werewolf in London where the 2 guys are walking together in that field just before they're attacked. Except this sounded almost as if there were 2 howls that were simultaneous where one was high and the other low. The howling was so loud that it must have echoed through the entire park. After a few minutes of silence, people began moving around in their tents, and some of the children started to cry. I could hear people asking each other what the hell that sound was and where it came from. I could hear the sound of tents unzipping as people were stepping outside to see if they could see anything. but all you could see was the blackness of the woods and the silhouette of its treetops. Looking back, it wasn't the howling from the woods that scared me the most, but rather the fearful voices of the other campers and the sound of the children crying. It was very unsettling, to say the least. After a while, everyone seemed to calm down, and most of the campers, including us, went back to sleep. I've been out there a couple times since then, whether it was for camping or hiking, and I've yet to hear anything like what we heard that night since. Sometimes I look back and think that maybe someone was playing a prank. Maybe some college students from town set up a giant speaker in the woods at around 3 o'clock in the morning and played a sound clip from a werewolf movie or something. It's possible. Not likely, but possible. That would also have to be one hell of a speaker. I find my brain trying to latch onto some logical explanation, but it just can't. I think whatever it was that John saw that day in the woods in Franklin, Indiana, is connected to whatever it was that all of us heard that night at Houston Woods State Park. Thank you for letting me share my story. Best regards, TR. Strange Blue Apparition. Hello, friend. My name is Troy, and I very much enjoy and appreciate your channel, and I'm always excited when I see a new compilation video. I've had several paranormal encounters throughout my life, and so I will start with my first, which occurred on my parents' property in southwest Mississippi after the last vacation I went on to Tennessee with my mom and dad when I was a teenager. A German Shepherd Thor had been shut in the fenced yard for the week we had been gone, and though it was dark when we got home, I decided to take him for our usual walk to let him stretch his legs, and because I always enjoyed our walks. Our usual route was about a mile in total, and made sort of a U-shape around my parents' property. To fully understand the encounter, I need to explain the route we walked. The first leg of the walk was an open field to the north for about 250 yards, up to a section of woods with a trail on the left and right that led to an open area where a large power line ran. The power line went from the northwest to the southeast. Once I reached the woods, I would go down the trail on the left, and once I reached the power line, I would turn and walk to the right, making my way to the trail on the right, and make my way back to the house. I've walked this route more times than I can count in my life, and this one night is the only time I ever experienced anything paranormal there. As Thor and I began our walk, he did his usual running about in the field, smelling this and that, and just enjoying life as dogs always do. Once we reached the woods, he came near to my side and remained there. As we made our way down the trail, his attention was focused to our left into the thick woods. About midway down, he began making a low growl, and the hair on his back was standing straight up. I wasn't at all afraid because I never went into the woods without my trusted Ruger 22 target pistol, but I was very curious as to what would be causing him to be so defensive, as he had never behaved this way on any of our walks in the past. His defensive behavior continued with the growling and hair standing up throughout the entire stretch of woods. Once we reached the open power line, he became even more aggressive, with an angry growl-bark combination, which made me stop and try to calm him down. At this point, I was honestly afraid because I knew he was aware of something I was not, which could be very serious. To the right, heading towards that other trail, went up a small hill, and as we reached the crest of the hill, I once again stopped to comfort him. Looking behind and down into the small hollow of the power line about 50 yards away, I saw something that at first I could not believe. There, making its way across the power line, moving from south to north, was the pale blue glowing silhouette of a person's head, shoulders, torso, and very faint arms. This apparition was moving at a speed as though it was running, as if it had legs. It was not at all solid, and was translucent with no discernible legs as it quickly floated towards the woods on the other side. At first I could not believe what I was seeing because this is, of course, the last thing anyone expects to see. And so, for a very few seconds, I was frozen until complete terror took over, and I began running to the house as fast as my legs could carry me with Thor right on my heels. I kept up this pace all the way to the house and was exhausted by the time I reached the house. My mom was outside in the utility room as I came running up, and she immediately knew something was wrong and asked me what was going on. As I explained to her what I had just seen, she could tell how truly terrified I was and said I was as white as a sheet, which I don't doubt. When I realized that whatever this was had probably been near us the whole way through the woods and was the reason for Thor's defensive behavior, I was even more frightened, knowing that this thing had been there the whole time and for whatever reason I hadn't seen it. I've walked this route many times since then and have never again seen this apparition. I have no explanation for what it was or where it may have come from. There was a farm on the property for 100 years prior to my parents building their house on the property in the early 70s, so I suppose the spirit could be left over from that time somehow. Well, that's it for my first story, and I hope you're able to use it on your channel. Thanks for the channel. Your friend, Troy Holmes. Well, friends, what an amazing collection of weird encounters. Let us know what you think about these personal stories in the comments below, but please be respectful of those who have told their stories and the opinions of others. Also, if you have any strange stories you'd like to see featured in an upcoming video, by all means, please email them to nationalparkmysteriesyt@gmail.com. We love sharing your encounters with humanoids, cryptids, or any other type of unknown entity or any experience that is beyond explanation. As always, thanks for listening, and please be sure to leave us a like on the video and to share and subscribe for more strange stories.